Speaker. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material on this measure.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Madam Speaker, it's regrettable that we are back to the floor considering another criminal contempt referral. But our former colleague, Mr. Meadows, has left us no choice. The Select Committee is investigating an attack on our democracy, and it's essential that witnesses cooperate with our investigation to get answers. The law requires them to do so, and when a witness defies the law, that amounts to more than obstruction our investigation. It's an attack on the rule of law. In September, the Select Committee subpoenaed Mr. Meadows for records and testimony because we believed he had information relevant to our investigation. For weeks, we went back and forth with Mr. Meadows through his lawyer to try to get cooperation. We extended his initial deposition date to November the 12th. When the date came, he hadn't produced any documents and he didn't show up. Throughout this time, Mr. Meadows and his representatives made a lot of noise about executive privilege and so-called absolute immunity. The idea that people who serve or served in certain senior roles are completely exempt from testifying before Congress. Now let's be clear. Courts have rejected absolute immunity at every opportunity, and the Justice Department has never authored an opinion that would support that sort of claim Mr. Meadows had made about his unofficial conduct. And we have lots of questions for Mr. Meadows about the unofficial conduct. And as for executive privilege, President Biden has chosen not to invoke it as far as Mr. Meadows is concerned. So, Mr. Meadows was obligated to comply with our subpoena and appear at a deposition. When he didn't, we were prepared at that point to move ahead with contempt proceedings. But at the same time, Madam Speaker, out of an abundance of fairness, we gave Mr. Meadows a final chance to cooperate. When he faced the possibility of contempt a few weeks ago, he finally decided, in part, to do the right thing and start providing information. He turned over roughly 9,000 pages of records that he himself said couldn't be covered by any claim of privilege. He also said he would appear at a deposition with the Select Committee, which we scheduled for December 8th. This is key. In an investigation like ours, when you produce records, you are expected to come in and answer questions about those records. And because not even Mr. Meadows was asserting any privilege claim over these records, there's no possible justification for wholesale refusing to answer questions about them. But that's not what he did. He told us the day before his deposition, the same day his book was published, that he would no longer cooperate with our investigation and that he wasn't coming in to be interviewed. Put all the other arguments aside. This isn't about any sort of privilege or immunity. This is about Mr. Meadows refusing to comply with the subpoena to discuss the records he himself turned over. Now he's hiding behind excuses. And at the end of the day, it's a simple proposition. If you're making excuses to avoid cooperating with our investigation, you're making excuses to hide the truth from the American people about what happened on January 6th. You're making excuses as part of a cover-up. And if you echo these excuses, if you base your arguments on these excuses, if you adopt these excuses as your own to explain why you won't take action, then you're part of that cover-up too. I want my colleagues to think long and hard about that, because as the Select Committee has made clear in the last day and will continue to make clear, There was a steady stream of communication between certain members of Congress and Mr. Meadows about matters central to our investigation. We have questions about those communications. We will pursue those questions, and we won't let the facts be buried by a cover-up. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I reserve the balance
The
of my time.
gentleman reserves